The dust settled over the dilapidated trading post as Mariah Collins stifled a cry behind chapped lips, her wrists bound by coarse rope that dug into her flesh. $200. The bearded man who called himself her stepfather announced to the crowd of hungry-eyed men. For a healthy young woman who can cook, clean, and warm your bed at night. She had become nothing more than merchandise in the lawless frontier of Wyoming Territory. 1878, another piece of goods to be bartered away to the highest bidder. Mariah kept her eyes downcast, her honey-blonde hair falling in tangled waves over her face as she stood on the crude wooden platform. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been a respected teacher in Boston, traveling west to marry a man she'd corresponded with for months. When she arrived to find him dead from fever, her escort, who claimed to be her fiancé's trusted friend, revealed his true nature, declaring he'd invested too much in her journey to let her go to waste. The bids came faster now. 150, 175, 200 from a red-faced cattle baron with hands like sledgehammers, 225 from a silver-toothed gambler. Mariah's heart hammered against her ribs as she imagined the fate that awaited her. $300. The voice cut through the commotion like a knife, deep, steady, and carrying the weight of authority. The crowd parted to reveal a tall figure on horseback, his face shadowed beneath a dark Stetson. Dust coated his leather vest and denim pants, evidence of long days on the trail. Nathan Blackwood pays his debts in cash, someone whispered. Owns the biggest spread north of Laramie. Mariah's stepfather by deception grinned greedily. Sold to Mr. Blackwood. As money changed hands, Mariah felt herself being pulled toward the stranger's horse. She caught a glimpse of intense blue eyes beneath the hat brim before being hoisted unceremoniously onto the saddle. Without a word, the man called Nathan spurred his horse forward, leaving the trading post behind. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the vast Wyoming landscape stretching endlessly around them. Mariah's body ached from the jarring ride, but fear kept her from complaining. When they finally stopped beside a creek, Nathan Blackwood dismounted and turned to face her. "Madam," he said, his voice gentler than she expected, "I'm going to cut those ropes now." Mariah flinched as he drew a knife from his belt, but true to his word, he only sliced through her bindings. The relief was immediate and painful as blood rushed back to her hands. "Why?" she managed to ask, rubbing her raw wrists. Nathan Blackwood removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to hold both steel and compassion. "No person should be sold like cattle," he said simply. He reached into his saddlebag and extracted a canteen. "Drink. You look half dead from thirst." As Mariah gratefully accepted the water, Nathan continued. "My ranch is another day's ride from here. I've got a spare room where you can stay until you decide what you want to do. No strings attached." Mariah stared at him, searching for deceit in his expression and finding none. "You paid $300 for nothing in return." A faint smile touched his lips. "I paid $300 to right a wrong. The way I see it, you're a gift from heaven sent to remind me there's still things worth fighting for in this world." For the first time in weeks, Mariah felt something besides fear, a fragile spark of hope. But experience had taught her that trust could be dangerous. "How do I know your intentions are honorable?" "You don't," Nathan replied honestly. "But you'll have your own room with a lock on the door, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, will be there to ensure propriety. First sign of trouble, she'll chase me off my own property with a cast-iron skillet." Despite everything, Mariah found herself smiling. "She sounds formidable." "Terrifying," Nathan agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now, shall we make camp for the night? Tomorrow's a long ride." As darkness fell over the Wyoming plains, Mariah watched Nathan efficiently prepare their modest camp. He gave her his bedroll while making do with his saddle blanket, keeping a respectful distance between them. The fire crackled, casting shadows across his face as he stared into the flames. "Why were you at that trading post?" Mariah finally asked. Nathan poked at the fire with a stick. "I was tracking a man who stole horses from my ranch. Followed his trail there." He glanced up at her. "Found something more important instead." "I was supposed to be married," Mariah said quietly. "Jonathan Miller. We wrote letters for a year. He was a doctor in Sweetwater." Nathan nodded. "I knew Dr. Miller. Good man. The fever took many last winter. His friend, the man who sold me today, was supposed to escort me back east when I discovered Jonathan had died. Instead, Mariah's voice faltered. You don't need to explain, Nathan said. Get some rest. You're safe now. As Mariah lay beneath the vast canopy of stars, she wondered if she truly was safe, or if she had merely exchanged one cage for another. But something in Nathan Blackwood's steady gaze made her want to believe in goodness again. Dawn broke over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. Mariah awoke to find Nathan already up, tending to the horses and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack. Not much of a meal, he apologized, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. But Mrs. Abernathy will fix that when we reach the ranch. Mariah accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you. For everything. Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable. We should reach Blackwood Ranch by sundown if we keep a good pace. The day passed in relative silence as they traversed the rugged Wyoming terrain. Nathan occasionally pointed out landmarks or shared brief stories about the land, but mostly they rode with only the rhythm of hoofbeats between them. By late afternoon, Mariah's body ached from the unfamiliar hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. There it is, Nathan finally announced, gesturing toward the valley below. Blackwood Ranch. Mariah gasped at the sight. A sprawling main house of hewn logs stood proudly amidst several outbuildings and corrals. A barn larger than any she'd seen dominated one side of the property, while cattle dotted the surrounding pastures. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney of the main house. It's beautiful, she whispered. Nathan's expression softened with pride. My father started with nothing but a claim and 20 head of cattle. Took me 15 years to build it to what you see now. As they approached, a stout woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her stern expression melted into surprise as she noticed Mariah. Nathan Blackwood, what trouble have you brought home this time? The woman called, though her tone held more curiosity than censure. Mrs. Abernathy, Nathan replied, dismounting and helping Mariah down from the horse. This is Miss Mariah Collins. She'll be our guest for a while. Mrs. Abernathy's shrewd eyes took in Mariah's disheveled appearance and the bruises on her wrists. Without comment, she stepped forward and took Mariah's arm. Well, come along then, Miss Collins. A hot bath and clean clothes are what you need, followed by a proper meal. Nathan cleared his throat. I'll see to the horses. As Mrs. Abernathy guided her toward the house, Mariah glanced back to see Nathan leading the horses toward the barn, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. Inside, the ranch house revealed unexpected comforts. Polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and even a few touches of elegance spoke of care and permanence. Mrs. Abernathy led her to a bedroom at the back of the house. This will be your room, she announced, opening the door to reveal a clean, pleasant space with a real bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the distant mountains. There's a lock, as Mr. Blackwood promised. Now, I'll have a bath brought up, and I believe I have a dress that might suit you with some alterations. Overwhelmed by the kindness, Mariah felt tears threaten. Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you both. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. Nathan Blackwood has his faults, but he's a good man. Whatever your story is, and I suspect it's not a pleasant one, you're safe here. She paused at the door. Supper in an hour. True to her word, Mrs. Abernathy soon returned with 2 ranch hands carrying a copper bathtub, followed by buckets of steaming water. Once alone, Mariah sank gratefully into the bath, scrubbing away days of dust and fear. The borrowed dress, though slightly large, was clean and respectable, a simple blue calico that felt luxurious after her soiled traveling clothes. When she descended to the dining room, Nathan rose from his chair, freshly washed and dressed in a clean shirt. For a moment, they regarded each other awkwardly, as if seeing each other clearly for the first time. Miss Collins, he said with a slight nod. Mr. Blackwood, she replied, taking the seat Mrs. Abernathy indicated. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. As they ate, Nathan explained the workings of the ranch: 5,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, horses, and crops for sustenance. And you manage all this yourself? Mariah asked. I have good men working for me, Nathan replied. 8 hands who live in the bunkhouse, plus Miguel who manages the horses, and Mrs. Abernathy who manages me. This last comment earned a snort from the housekeeper as she cleared their plates. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where a fire warded off the evening chill. Nathan offered Mariah a seat in one of 2 comfortable armchairs before the hearth. Miss Collins, he began hesitantly, I want to be clear about your situation here. You're not beholden to me or anyone else. When you're ready, I'll take you wherever you wish to go back east, to another town, wherever you choose. Mariah studied her hands. I have nowhere to go. My parents died 3 years ago. I sold everything to come west. Then stay as long as you need, Nathan said simply. The ranch always needs extra hands, and Mrs. Abernathy complains she's overworked, though I've never seen evidence of it. He ignored the housekeeper's indignant huff from the doorway. I was a teacher in Boston, Mariah offered. I could perhaps be useful with accounts or correspondence. Nathan's expression brightened. That would be welcome indeed. My ledgers are in disarray, and I've letters from cattle buyers that should have been answered weeks ago. For the first time since learning of Jonathan's death, Mariah felt a sense of purpose returning. Then it settled. I'll earn my keep until I decide what comes next. Later, as Mariah prepared for bed in her new room, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it cautiously to find Mrs. Abernathy holding a small wooden box. Thought you might need these, the older woman said, handing her the box. Inside were basic toiletries, hairpins, and other feminine necessities. Been saving them for when Mr. Blackwood finally found himself a wife, but seems you need them more immediately. His wife? Mariah questioned, surprised. Mrs. Abernathy shrugged. Man his age should be settled. 34, and still riding the range like a restless boy. His mother, God rest her soul, would be scandalized. She fixed Mariah with a penetrating gaze. Whatever happened to bring you here, Miss Collins? I hope you'll be gentle with him. He may look tough as leather, but he's got a heart that breaks easy. Before Mariah could respond, the housekeeper bid her good night and retreated down the hall, leaving Mariah to wonder about the complex man who had rescued her from a terrible fate. The following weeks established a rhythm to life at Blackwood Ranch. Mornings found Mariah helping Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast before retiring to Nathan's study to tackle the neglected correspondence and chaotic ledgers. Afternoons might find her gathering eggs, tending the kitchen garden, or occasionally reading on the porch when work permitted. Evenings brought dinner with Nathan and sometimes quiet conversation by the fire, where they cautiously shared pieces of their lives. Nathan, she learned, had fought briefly in the waning days of the Civil War as a boy of 16, before returning to help his ailing father with the ranch. He'd lost his mother to influenza and his father to a fall from a horse 10 years past. Since then, he'd poured himself into building Blackwood Ranch into one of the most respected spreads in the territory. For her part, Mariah shared stories of Boston, her years teaching, and eventually, the full tale of her journey west and the betrayal that followed Jonathan's death. Nathan listened without judgment, though she noted how his jaw tightened and his hands clenched when she described her treatment at the hands of her supposed escort. If I ever encounter Mr. Redfield again, Nathan said darkly after she finished her story, he'll wish he'd never set foot in Wyoming Territory. He's not worth your trouble, Mariah replied, though she was touched by his protective instinct. Nathan's gaze held hers across the firelight. You were worth $300 to me when you were a stranger, Miss Collins. Now that I know you, I'd say that was the best investment I ever made. The comment, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, brought heat to Mariah's cheeks. She looked away, suddenly conscious of how comfortable she had become in his presence, and how dangerously close she was to developing feelings that went beyond gratitude. Spring advanced into summer, bringing long days of ranch work and occasional excitement. In late June, a band of cattle rustlers attempted to make off with a dozen of Nathan's prized breeding stock. The ensuing chase and confrontation left Nathan with a bullet graze across his shoulder, a minor wound that nonetheless caused Mariah more distress than she cared to admit. It's nothing, Nathan insisted as she helped Mrs. Abernathy clean and bandage the injury. Barely broke the skin. You could have been killed, Mariah countered, her fingers trembling slightly as she secured the bandage. Nathan caught her hand, stilling its motion. Been dealing with rustlers since I was a boy. Takes more than a stray bullet to put me down. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that his safety mattered to her in ways that transcended mere friendship or gratitude. Mariah withdrew her hand first, making a show of tidying the medical supplies. "Well, try not to make a habit of it," she said lightly. "Mrs. Abernathy and I have enough work without patching up foolhardy cowboys." Nathan's laugh followed her from the room, warm and genuine in a way that made her heart skip traitorously. The following Sunday brought a rare treat, an invitation to a neighboring ranch for a summer social. The Hendersons always host a gathering when their daughter visits from Denver, Nathan explained over breakfast. "There'll be food, music, perhaps some dancing. Mrs. Abernathy and I typically attend. Would you care to join us?" The prospect of meeting new people, especially under circumstances where her presence might raise questions, made Mariah hesitate. "I'm not sure that's wise. People might wonder about my situation here." "Let them wonder," Nathan said with a shrug. "Anyone who matters already knows you're helping with the accounts and correspondence. Besides," he added with an unexpected smile, "I'd like to show off the woman who's finally brought order to my business affairs." In the end, curiosity and the desire for social interaction outweighed her concerns. Sunday afternoon found Mariah wearing her best dress, a new green cotton that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her sew, as Nathan drove them to the Henderson Ranch in his wagon. The gathering was larger than Mariah expected, with families from ranches and farms within a 20-mile radius in attendance. Tables laden with food stood beneath shade trees, while a trio of musicians played lively tunes to which several couples danced on a wooden platform. Nathan's arrival with Mariah at his side caused a noticeable stir. Whispers followed them as they made their way through the crowd, but Nathan seemed oblivious, introducing her proudly as Miss Collins, who's brought civilization to Blackwood Ranch. Margaret Henderson, a plump, pleasant woman who clearly adored Nathan, welcomed Mariah warmly. "Any friend of Nathan's is welcome here," she declared, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Now come meet everyone while the men talk boring cattle prices." Through Margaret's introductions, Mariah soon found herself surrounded by the wives and daughters of neighboring ranchers. Most were friendly, though some regarded her with undisguised speculation. "So, Miss Collins," said one woman, Eliza Montgomery, wife of a wealthy cattle broker with barely concealed nosiness, "how exactly did you come to be staying at the Blackwood Ranch? Nathan has never mentioned family from back east." Before Mariah could formulate a response, another voice interrupted. "Nathan Blackwood saved Miss Collins from a terrible situation earlier this year." Mrs. Abernathy had materialized beside her, eyes flashing with protective fire. "She's repaying his kindness by bringing order to his business affairs, which any of you who've received letters from the ranch recently can attest to. And that's all anyone needs to know." Eliza's mouth thinned with disappointment at being denied gossip, but she nodded stiffly and moved away. Mrs. Abernathy gave Mariah's arm a reassuring pat before disappearing back into the crowd. Later, as the afternoon waned into evening and lanterns were lit around the dance area, Nathan found Mariah watching the dancers from a quiet corner. "You look like you could use some rescue again," he said, offering her a cup of punch. Mariah accepted gratefully. "Your neighbors have been mostly kind, if curious. People always want stories to tell during the long winter months," Nathan replied with a shrug. "Next month they'll gossip about something else." The musicians struck up a waltz, and Nathan set down his cup. "Would you care to dance, Miss Collins?" Mariah hesitated. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I," he admitted with a crooked smile. "We can be terrible together." Against her better judgment, Mariah placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. Nathan's hand at her waist was warm and steady as they joined the other couples. Despite his claims of rustiness, he moved with surprising grace for a man who spent most days in a saddle. "You dance quite well for a rancher, Mr. Blackwood," she observed as they turned beneath the lantern light. "My mother insisted I learn," he replied, his voice low near her ear. "Said a gentleman should know how to dance even if he lives 1,000 miles from civilization." "She sounds like a wise woman. She would have liked you," Nathan said, his blue eyes intent on hers. Strong-minded women always got along well with her. As they danced, Mariah became increasingly aware of the eyes upon them, some approving, others speculative. She was also acutely conscious of Nathan's proximity, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, and the gentle strength in his hands. When the music ended, Nathan reluctantly released her. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Collins. I believe after 3 months of living under your roof, you might call me Mariah," she suggested impulsively. A slow smile spread across his face. "Mariah," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "Then you must call me Nathan." The ride home beneath a canopy of stars felt different somehow, charged with unspoken possibility. Even Mrs. Abernathy seemed to sense it, dozing or pretending to doze. In the back of the wagon, while Nathan and Mariah sat side by side on the driver's bench, their conversation drifting comfortably between observations about the evening and comfortable silences. When they arrived back at the ranch, Nathan helped both women down from the wagon before turning to tend to the horses. "Good night, Mariah," he said, her name still new and significant on his lips. "Good night, Nathan," she replied, the simple exchange feeling momentous in the quiet darkness. As summer reached its peak, the work on the ranch intensified. Nathan spent long days in the saddle, preparing for the fall cattle drive that would take him and most of his men away for nearly 3 weeks. Mariah threw herself into organizing the ranch's affairs so everything would run smoothly in his absence, ignoring the growing dread she felt about his impending departure. The evening before Nathan was to leave, he found Mariah on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. He settled into the chair beside her, the wooden boards creaking beneath his weight. "Everything's prepared," he said after a comfortable silence. "Miguel will stay behind to manage things here, and Mrs. Abernathy has enough supplies to last until winter if needed." "I've finished all the correspondence," Mariah replied. "The ledgers are updated, and I've drafted letters to the cattle buyers in Cheyenne for when you return with the final count." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've become indispensable to Blackwood Ranch." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Mariah looked down at her hands. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to be useful." "Is that all it is?" "Gratitude." Nathan's voice had dropped lower, a hint of vulnerability beneath the question. Mariah's heart thundered in her chest. "No," she admitted softly. "Not only gratitude." Nathan shifted in his chair to face her more directly. "I'll be gone 3 weeks. When I return, I'd like us to talk about the future." "Your future?" "Here, if you want it." "My future," Mariah repeated, hardly daring to look at him. "Our future," Nathan clarified, reaching out to take her hand. "If that's something you might consider." Mariah finally met his gaze, finding in it all the things he wasn't quite saying aloud. "I'll be here when you return," she promised. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "That's all I needed to hear." The cattle drive departed at dawn the next morning, Nathan riding at the head of his men as they moved 300 head of cattle toward the railroad at Cheyenne. Mariah watched from the porch until the dust cloud disappeared over the horizon, Mrs. Abernathy standing silently beside her. "He'll be back," the older woman said matter-of-factly. "Man's got more reason than ever to return safely." Mariah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The ranch felt suddenly empty despite the remaining hands going about their duties. She threw herself into work to fill the void, helping Mrs. Abernathy with preserving the garden's late summer bounty, continuing to organize the ranch's paperwork, and even learning to ride properly under Miguel's patient instruction. 10 days into Nathan's absence, trouble arrived in the form of 3 riders approaching from the east. Miguel spotted them first, alerting Mrs. Abernathy and Mariah with concern in his usually calm demeanor. "I do not recognize them," he said, handing Mariah the spyglass. "And they are not riding like men with honest business." Mariah's blood ran cold as she focused the glass on the lead rider. Even at this distance, she recognized the stocky build and unkempt beard of Peter Redfield, the man who had tried to sell her at the trading post. "It's him," she whispered, her hand trembling. "The man who sold me." Mrs. Abernathy's expression hardened. "Miguel, get the rifle and alert the other boys. Miss Collins, come inside immediately." They barricaded themselves in the house, Miguel and the 2 remaining ranch hands positioning themselves strategically around the property. When Redfield and his companions reined in before the house, Mariah watched through a crack in the curtains, her heart pounding. "Hello, the house," Redfield called, his voice sickeningly familiar. "I've come to retrieve what's mine." Mrs. Abernathy stepped onto the porch, a shotgun held casually but purposefully in her arms. "There's nothing here that belongs to you, mister. Best ride on." Redfield laughed, an ugly sound. "The woman inside, Mariah Collins. I paid good money to bring her west, and then she was stolen from me. I aim to take her back. Miss Collins is under the protection of Blackwood Ranch," Mrs. Abernathy replied steadily. "Mr. Blackwood paid fair price for her freedom, as I understand it." "Blackwood cheated me," Redfield snarled. "Woman like that is worth far more than $300 to the right buyer. Now stand aside, old woman, or things will get unpleasant." Mariah's fingers tightened on the curtain as she saw Redfield's hand drift toward his holster. Before he could draw, however, the distinctive click of rifles being cocked sounded from various positions around the yard. Miguel and the other hands had the intruders covered from multiple angles. "3 of you, 4 of us," Mrs. Abernathy observed calmly. "And we're on home ground. How do you fancy those odds, Mr. Redfield?" Redfield's face contorted with rage, but even he could see the disadvantage. "This isn't over," he spat. "Blackwood won't always be around to protect his whore." As they wheeled their horses to leave, Mariah stepped onto the porch beside Mrs. Abernathy, her fear giving way to righteous anger. "Mr. Redfield," she called, her voice stronger than she felt. The man turned, surprise registering on his face. "When Nathan Blackwood returns, I'll make sure he knows you came looking for trouble," she continued. "He's not a man who forgets those who threaten what's his. I suggest you ride far and fast, because he will hunt you down otherwise." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Redfield's face. Then, with a curse, he spurred his horse away, his companions following close behind. Once they disappeared from sight, Mariah's legs nearly gave way. Mrs. Abernathy caught her arm, guiding her back inside. "That was either very brave or very foolish," the housekeeper remarked, though approval glinted in her eyes. "Either way, Miguel will keep watch in case they return, and I'll send word to Nathan." "No," Mariah said quickly. "Don't interrupt the cattle drive. We handled it." Mrs. Abernathy studied her face before nodding slowly. "As you wish. But we'll keep extra vigilance until the boss returns." The incident cast a shadow over the remaining days of Nathan's absence. Though Redfield didn't return, Mariah found herself jumping at sounds and peering anxiously into the distance. When she finally spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the south, Nathan and his men returning several days ahead of schedule, the relief nearly overwhelmed her. She stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the setting sun as the riders approached. Nathan rode slightly ahead of the others, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. When he saw her waiting, he spurred his horse forward, covering the remaining distance at a gallop. He dismounted in a fluid motion, crossing to the porch in long strides. "Mariah," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else, concern, perhaps, or a deeper emotion. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, suddenly conscious of the ranch hands watching with poorly concealed interest. "The drive ended early?" "Got a good price sooner than expected," Nathan replied, though his searching gaze told her there was more to the story. "Miguel rode out to meet us yesterday. Told me about your visitors. So much for not worrying him. It was nothing we couldn't handle." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Redfield will be dealt with. I've already sent word to the sheriff in Laramie." Further conversation was interrupted as the remaining hands arrived, horses and men alike ready for rest and food. Nathan reluctantly turned to oversee the final tasks of the day, though his eyes frequently sought Mariah as she helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare a celebratory meal for the returning men. It wasn't until much later, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Abernathy to her room, that Nathan and Mariah found themselves alone on the porch, a lantern casting golden light over them as night settled across the ranch. "I should have been here," Nathan said, breaking the silence that had stretched comfortably between them. "If anything had happened to you, but it didn't," Mariah interrupted gently. "Mrs. Abernathy is formidable, and your men were vigilant." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, still damp from the bath he'd taken upon returning. "When Miguel told me Redfield had found you, I nearly rode back alone that night. I'm glad you didn't, Mariah said. That would have been foolish. Perhaps, he conceded. But the thought of that man anywhere near you again. His hands clenched into fists. I bought your freedom, Mariah, but I've come to realize I never truly owned it. You've given me far more than I gave you. Mariah shook her head, moved by his words. You gave me safety when I needed it most. A home when I had none. Purpose when I felt lost. And now? Nathan asked, his voice dropping lower as he turned to face her fully. What do you need now, Mariah Collins? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Mariah took a deep breath, finding courage in the warmth of his gaze. Before you left, you mentioned discussing our future when you returned. I've had 3 weeks to think about what I want that future to be. Nathan waited, his expression a mixture of hope and restraint. And what did you decide? That I want to stay, Mariah said simply. Not as your housekeeper or bookkeeper, but as more. If that's still what you want. The tension in Nathan's shoulders visibly released. I decided the same thing somewhere between here and Cheyenne, he admitted. Actually, I think I decided at the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, looking defiant despite everything. He reached for her hands, engulfing them in his larger ones. I told you then that you were a gift from heaven. I didn't realize how true those words would become. Drawing a breath, he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I love you, Mariah Collins. I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife. Tears pricked at Mariah's eyes, unexpected but welcome. I love you too, Nathan. And yes, I would be proud to be your wife. Nathan's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry and weariness. With gentle reverence, he drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. May I kiss you, Mariah? Her answer was to close the distance between them herself. Their first kiss was tender, almost hesitant, a promise of deeper passion tempered by respect. When they parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Mrs. Abernathy will be insufferably pleased with herself, he murmured, amusement coloring his tone. She's been dropping hints since your second week here. Mariah laughed softly. She told me she'd been saving toiletries for when Mr. Blackwood finally found himself a wife. Meddling old. Nathan's complaint dissolved into a chuckle. I suppose we should thank her. Among others, Mariah agreed, thinking of how circumstance and cruelty had ultimately led her to happiness. As if reading her thoughts, Nathan's expression sobered. What happened to you was unforgivable, Mariah. But I can't help being grateful that it brought you to me. From being traded like goods to finding love, Mariah mused. Life takes unexpected turns. Nathan pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. Tomorrow we'll ride into town, speak to the Reverend about setting a date. Unless you want to wait. Mariah shook her head. I've waited long enough for happiness. Haven't you? His answer was another kiss, deeper than the first, full of promise and newfound certainty. Their wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Laramie, attended by neighboring ranchers, townspeople who had come to know Mariah during her visits with Nathan, and even the sheriff who had finally apprehended Peter Redfield, now awaiting trial for multiple counts of fraud and kidnapping. Mrs. Abernathy wept openly as Mariah, wearing a cream-colored gown ordered specially from Denver, promised to love and honor Nathan for all her days. Nathan, resplendent in a new black suit that made his blue eyes even more striking, spoke his vows in a voice that carried to every corner of the church, leaving no doubt of his devotion. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the Reverend declared, beaming at the couple. Mr. Blackwood, you may kiss your bride. As Nathan's lips met hers to seal their union, Mariah felt the final pieces of her past falling away. She was no longer a possession to be traded or a victim to be pitted. She was Mariah Blackwood, beloved wife and partner, standing proudly beside the man who had seen her worth when others saw only profit. The celebration that followed at Blackwood Ranch lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the yard where Nathan led Mariah in a dance similar to their first at the Henderson social. Happy, Mrs. Blackwood? He asked, his eyes never leaving hers as they moved together beneath the stars. More than I ever thought possible, Mariah replied honestly. Later, When the guests had departed, and they were finally alone in the master bedroom, now theirs to share, Nathan took her hands in his expression solemn despite the joy of the day. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "What I said that day at the trading post, that you were my gift from heaven, I meant it then as kind words to a frightened woman. But now—" He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "Now I know it was the simple truth. You are the greatest blessing of my life, Mariah." Tears of happiness spilled down Mariah's cheeks as she wound her arms around her husband's neck. "And you are mine, Nathan Blackwood. From property to cherished wife, you've given me a journey I could never have imagined." His kiss was both tender and passionate, a beginning rather than an ending. Outside their window, the vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above Blackwood Ranch, stars witnessing the love that had blossomed from the most unlikely circumstances, a love that would weather the seasons of their lives together, growing stronger with each passing year. 2 years later, Mariah stood on the front porch of Blackwood Ranch, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly as she watched Nathan teaching their daughter to ride her first pony. Little Elizabeth, not quite 18 months old, squealed with delight as her father led the gentle creature in a circle, her tiny hands clutching the specially made saddle. "Careful with my grandbaby," Mrs. Abernathy called from where she was shelling peas nearby, though her tone held more affection than admonition. Nathan grinned up at them, sunlight catching in his hair, now touched with the first hints of silver at the temples. "She's a Blackwood, Mrs. A, born to the saddle." Mariah smiled, feeling the baby within her shift and kick as if in agreement. The doctor in Laramie had predicted an early autumn birth for their second child, hopefully a boy, Nathan said, though he would treasure another daughter just as fiercely. Blackwood Ranch had prospered alongside their family. The herd had grown to over 500 head, and Nathan had expanded their holdings by purchasing an adjacent property the previous spring. Mariah still maintained the books and correspondence, now with the help of a young schoolteacher who rode out from town twice weekly. Life wasn't without challenges. Drought had threatened their grazing lands last summer, and winter storms occasionally isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But together, they faced each obstacle with the same determination that had brought them through their early trials. As she watched her husband lift their giggling daughter from the pony, Mariah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment of contentment. From the terror of being sold like merchandise to the joy of creating a family with a man who treasured her beyond measure, it was a path she could never have foreseen but would never wish to change. Nathan caught her gaze across the yard, his smile softening as he carried Elizabeth toward the house. "Thinking deep thoughts, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked as he climbed the porch steps, settling their daughter on his hip. "Just counting my blessings," Mariah replied, accepting his kiss with a happiness that still felt new despite the years. "And they are many indeed." As the Wyoming sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, casting golden light across the land they had built together, Mariah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the love of the man who had once called her his gift from heaven, and who proved the truth of those words with each passing day.